Be seated, please.
I'm going to withdraw my last question and try and rephrase it. Dr. Friedman, I have read, the jury has heard time and time again, the definition of what a paraphilic is. Okay?
Yes.
Just on the question of paraphilia, assume that the object of the paraphilia is necrophilia.
Yes.
Is it the fact that that person makes choices to achieve the object of his paraphilia in any way dispositive?
Anyway,
dispositive. I mean, does it end the matter? In other words, his choices are to do A, B, C, and D to achieve the object of his paraphilia, which is necrophilia.
Bring it to a conclusion.
Do you understand where I'm at so far?
I think so.
The fact that he makes choices to achieve that object mean that there is no circumstance under which his paraphilia could ever be considered an impairment of the mind.
I guess I would consider paraphilias, including necrophilias, impairments of the mind by definition, and in my own construct, think of it as a sexual deviation, which is an impairment of the mind, but also allowing the person to make choices at all points.
The word choice means voluntary, correct?
Yes.
A person suffering from a severe psychosis, such as schizophrenia, likewise makes choices, do they not?
One can construe choices transcending mental state. We all make choices independent of severity of problems.
The schizophrenic whose delusions or hallucinations direct them to a certain goal, and they go towards that goal, would be making choices such as how to get to the place to achieve the goal by driving a car, taking a bus, flying an airplane. True?
Yes.
So that schizophrenic who's disabled by their schizophrenic, whose delusion is to go into the middle of a forest and look for a treasure, and they're sick mentally because of their schizophrenia, decides in that state of mind that they're going to drive a car, and they're going to read a map, and they're going to drive towards the place, and they're going to go into the woods in spite of the fact it's 25 below zero, are making choices, correct?
Yes.
It does not diminish the fact of their mental illness, does it?
That's correct.
You indicated that Jeffrey Dahmer needed treatment.
Yes.
You indicated in your written report, and I'm not sure if you read every word in the written report. I know that you read a lot more than that, yeah. But you indicated that at one time he was seen to be dangerous by a professional.
Yes.
And that he was not treated.
That's correct.
Did the treatment that you would encompass as an expert in the field of psychology include taking of antipsychotic medication?
Objection, Your Honor.
Let me rephrase it then. Did the treatment that you considered encompass taking medication?
No.
Is it your belief that Jeffrey Dahmer, on the day after his 10th murder, had the ability to say, no more, I will not kill again, without treatment?
Yes.
Let me have the question.
Question. Is it your belief that Jeffrey Dahmer, on the day after his 10th murder, had the ability to say, no more, I will not kill again, without treatment?
Question with that.
No, sustained.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty whether or not Jeffrey Dahmer would have continued to kill, his killing, to effectuate the object of his disorder as you have described it, without treatment?
Yes,
And what is your opinion?
that he would have continued in that manner.
You made just a couple of statements that I'd like to highlight out of your report to ask if I understood them correct. Mr. Dahmer had been exhaustively interviewed, and I'm talking about you and others, for the past 2 to 3 years, and may well have adopted a perfunctory, almost robot-like manner of responding to interview questions. Is that what you said?
Yes,
Was that because of you referring to the demeanor and how he conducted himself in your presence?
was my observation as I was interviewing him, yes.
You said at the interviews he made a repeated point of his wish to express contrition by informing the victims' families of the events leading to various deaths. He states that his future is bleak indeed, and he has given serious thoughts to suicide. Had you told us that already today?
That's correct.
Okay. You said in your report that his explanation of his criminal behavior concerns his need to maintain control, and you underline that, over his victims in order to achieve maximum and perhaps lasting satisfaction.
Yes, sir.
What's lasting satisfaction?
Enduring would be a synonym, but over a substantial period of time.
But it was not lasting satisfaction by having the victim become a part of him.
Well, it would be of evident benefit that it would have a more enduring, if it became part of him.
Did you believe that he involved in cannibalism, or did you think he made that up?
No, I believe that.
Believe he did.
Yes.
Did you believe that he had, you were in court for the testimony of Dr. Becker? Oh, by the way, there was some question asked to Dr. Becker about the fact that she called him Jeffrey and whether that was any meaning that she developed some kind of a rapport relationship with him and became more of an adversary because of that. All day yesterday in your testimony, you called him Jeffrey also.
I wasn't aware of it. It's likely true.
Yeah. It has absolutely no meaning, right? That the fact that you call him Jeffrey means nothing other than the fact that that's how you're reporting the matter, and maybe because of your age and his youth, that's an appropriate way to refer to him.
That would be correct.
And your opinion, obviously, because you were here for Dr. Becker, is completely different than Dr. Becker's. Well, not completely different.
No, in truth, I felt she was an unusually compassionate person, but it is not extraordinary that an older professional psychologist calls a younger person by first name.
And frankly, you're a compassionate person.
I hope so.
Sure. And did you at some time in your life say, I better not, I can now start calling people by their first name when I testify? You never made that conscious decision, did you?
No, it seemed to evolve gradually with the years.
Okay. You said that the timing of the numerous deaths, according to Mr. Dahmer, prompted by the emergence of uncontrolled feelings of lust. Is that what he told you?
Yes.
Did you believe him when he told you that?
Yes.
Okay. You said the profiles of his tests, 89, 91, and 92, and that's the MMPI that you educated us on, are uniformly characteristic of a severe personality disorder in which elements of depression, impulsivity, and poor anger control are evident. the profiles are associated with poor therapy diagnosis and warrant concern regarding antisocial, if not dangerous, tendencies.
Yes.
Okay, now, trying to follow your graph, you really said, as I understood it, that the MMPI hasn't really gotten itself where there's one graph that shows sexual or paraphilic disorders. They're within the old ones. When this thing was developed, there had not been the split off of the two concepts, right?
The original diagnoses did not include paraphilia, but...
No, I'm talking about the tests, though.
Yeah, no, the test had a scale for psychopathic deviant, which was intended to include sexual deviants. And
He was high on that?
yes,
How high?
I think in the 80s, which is 3 standard deviations above normal. That's very high.
And that would concern you as a psychologist.
Yes,
Then you told us that there was some other line that shows the concept of whether or not the person is showing some schizophrenia.
yes,
And now the schizophrenia we're talking about is the same as the schizophrenia they use when they're talking about psychosis.
yes,
And you said that the schizophrenia that he was showing when you tested him was higher than it was in the earlier test.
that's correct.
And the earlier test you were talking about, I believe I heard you, was the one that was taken in 89.
Yes, and I had access to one taken in 86.
86. So we see an elevation in the line about schizophrenia from 86 to 90, late 91, 92 when you did this.
Yes,
And you said that a lot of times people who are sitting in jail cells tend to show that that line goes up because of that environment.
yes.
But by the same token, how high, first of all, how high was that schizophrenia line in 86?
I don't recall. I'm not sure. I may have the record here, but I'd have to look.
Would it take you long to
Yeah,
find
but,
it?
I could search and let you know in 3-4 minutes. And
Okay, I'd like you to do that, but see if I can't maybe short circuit it. It was much lower than the one you saw in 91.
my memory is it was substantially lower. That's correct.
How high was it in 91?
That's December of 91 as opposed to January of 92. There were 2, and they were approximately the same.
Okay, how high were they?
Be about 80 is my recollection. I could let you know in 10 seconds.
Sure.
I'm sorry, a faulty memory. It was up at 102.
What does that mean?
That's very, very high. That's 4 standard deviations above the mean. It would be a fraction of 1% of all the people taking the test.
If I took that test and I showed up that high, might you conclude that I had schizophrenia?
No.
What would you conclude then when it's that?
As what I said, you have a personality disorder. But if I may...
See, I need you to explain the connection between schizophrenia and personality disorder.
It indicates to me the greater likelihood of an emergence of an underlying psychotic process which may be there.
So what you're saying is that if I'm on a low scale, you're not worried about finding out whether or not I'm on the road to psychosis. But if it's high, you might be a little concerned that I might be on the road to psychosis.
Right, particularly in a incarcerated environment.
Okay, I want to ask you that. If a person such as yourself would say that while not disagreeing with you on your belief that people who are in an incarcerated situation might show a high level, that might also be indicative of a substantial change in his personality from 86 to 91 and early 92 when the test was administered.
That would be possible.
And we know in Jeffrey Dahmer that between 86 and 91, 92, when he took your 2 tests almost back to back, that he had killed 16 human beings. Correct?
Yes.
Did you take that into account, that maybe when he was answering those questions in 91, 92, when you gave him those 2 tests within a few weeks, that his schizophrenic line was going up that high because of the reasons of him knowing that he had killed all of these people, and not necessarily simply because he was sitting in a jail cell when he took it? Did you consider that?
Yes, it was my opinion. It was not put in my report that his adjustment level was deteriorating over the period of time you specify.
From 86 to 91?
Yes.
It's clear, is it not, that one could conclude, as you have, to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, that the reason that Jeffrey Dahmer's schizophrenic line was rising at that level, causing that professional to consider psychosis, was because, in fact, he was going towards a psychosis rather than the personality disorder, in addition to the personality disorder.
Yeah, he continued to have a severe personality disorder, but the emergence of an underlying schizophrenic process became more and more likely during that time period.
Sure. What I'm trying to say is that you're not saying absolutely that the reason it was that high was because he was in jail. It may have been others. One could conclude there might be other reasons it was that high.
Right. The most immediate reason was my knowledge and his description of the jail circumstances, but also could have been contributed to by his deteriorating adjustment.
I think I'm about finished. Let me just go around the horn.
Sure.
Thank you, Doctor.
Cross-examination by the state.
Thank you. Dr. Friedman, first on that last issue, you indicated that you were satisfied that there was some deterioration in Mr. Dahmer.
It's a hypothesis, but I think it's borne out.
Okay. And so that you saw him on January 4th, 1992, correct?
That was the last time professionally.
That was when you administered the MMPI,
For the second time.
which showed the, when was your first MMPI again?
I believe it was December 19th.
Okay. So these December and January MMPIs where Mr. Boyle has talked about the schizophrenic indication, even looking at those, you concluded, did you not, that in December and January of December of 1991 and January of 1992, that Mr. Dahmer was not schizophrenic, correct?
That's correct.
Was not psychotic, correct?
Correct.
And if his condition wasn't deteriorating, and from the other materials you've looked at, it's fair to assume, is it not, that prior to that time, he was even less on the road to schizophrenia or psychosis than he was when you saw him, correct?
Yes, my memory of the 1986 MMPI protocol is that it was substantially less severe.
All right. Now let's go to another issue. Mr. Boyle referred back to your use of the word Jeffrey, and indeed you did call him Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Correct? Did you ever read a 26-page document that has the word Mr. Dahmer only in it to this jury and change it virtually every time to Jeffrey?
I'm
as
not aware.
Dr. Becker admitted doing?
I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. Did you see Dr. Becker's testimony?
I saw a substantial portion of it, not all.
Did you see substantial portions when she was reading her notes to the jury?
Some.
And were you aware she was using the name Jeffrey?
That was brought to my attention by the examination of her. I had not been previously aware. I had not Well, actually, I read her brief report. I'm not even
Her
clear
brief
as to what she
report,
called him.
not her 26 pages
Right.
of notes.
Right.
Right. Assume based on the previous testimony that a person has a 26-page document that they read and the words Mr. Dahmer are changed continuously in the reading, not just in conversation, in the reading. They're changed from Mr. Dahmer to Jeffrey when they go from what's looked at to what's said. Is that an interesting psychological process to you?
It's of some interest.
Is there something called countertransference?
It is rumored that it abounds in the world, but it's sometimes known by other names.
Such as?
What would be compassion, empathy, things of that sort.
All of which are very good traits.
If used wisely, they're even valuable traits.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to a couple of other things. Mr. Boyle used a couple of examples about if you needed to, would you want to see a person, I think he indicated, who indicated that at his house he had a table and he had a fetish for red shoes. And he went out and he bought 500 pairs of red shoes and set up this altar to red shoes, and whether or not you'd want to see him. I think your indication was yes, you would, correct?
Would be an unusual behavioral manifestation.
Would stealing 500 pairs of red shoes, would he be excused for that because he wanted red shoes?
I think only in the Philippine Islands, perhaps.
Mr. Boyle also talked about, and I think he used himself as an example, an intense fascination with mushrooms. And
That was a hypothetical. I don't really, not any
however, we'll relieve Mr. Boyle of it, but let's assume, going back to his hypothetical about someone having, he said going out all day into the woods and picking mushrooms, and that's all he's doing, and that he made it a paraphilia, correct?
I think he was trying to use a possible example of one.
All right, now a paraphilia is basically sexual desire, intense sexual desire, but it's for an unusual, forbidden, or taboo object, correct?
That's correct.
But the sexual desire is something, as far as we know, all human beings feel, correct?
To greater or less degree, it's a universal.
It's the object of that desire that makes it a paraphilia, correct?
Yes, it's culturally defined.
Now, going back to the person with the paraphilic fascination for mushrooms, assume that this person has a paraphilic fascination for mushrooms and goes into the woods one day and sees a little girl who's picking mushrooms, and she's got a basket full of them, and hating killing. He's got a flask of alcohol with him. He takes a drink because he knows he's going to kill that little girl to get the mushrooms. Is he responsible for his conduct?
objection to the form of the question. It doesn't contain enough facts to be able to warrant the doctor without a better foundation to answer the question. Let me have it right back.
Question. Now, going back to the person with the paraphilic fascination for mushrooms, assume that the person has paraphilic fascination for mushrooms and goes into the
I
woods.
don't need any more. Sustained.
Alcohol reduces inhibitions, correct?
That's true.
And the ability to conform one's conduct to the requirements of law is a characteristic that's soluble in alcohol, isn't it?
Yes, by tradition, it is not a mitigator.
Another point, you indicated that you had spent time in the military, and I believe you also, as a psychologist, worked with the military.
I work with the Peace Corps.
Mr. Dahmer, through the reports that you have probably read, indicated on a number of occasions that what he did so that he could kill his victims was keep them as objects. He didn't want to get to know them. Is that a very common psychological phenomenon in order to reduce the normal human inhibition to killing?
I'm having difficulty with that. Would you mind repeating it?
Okay, maybe I can simplify it.
Okay.
Mr. Dahmer indicated on a number of occasions, you may have read this in his reports, that one of the things he did was intentionally view his victims as objects, so that it would be easier to kill them. Is that a common psychological phenomenon in the military and such that enables people to kill those that they intend to by dehumanizing them?
With all due respect, are we talking about you during combat? Because we are, I'm going to object to the form of the question. That'd be a better foundation than that.
I don't know.
What? Let me rephrase it then. Is dehumanizing does intentionally dehumanizing or objectifying another person make it easier to kill that person?
It is my understanding that it is a frequent military form of indoctrination with troops going overseas into combat, that is done. I'm not sure how frequently, but it does happen.
And using that psychological technique on yourself also makes it easier for you in a homicide situation not to conform your conduct to the requirements of law, correct?
Makes it easier to kill.
And killing is a lack of conformity with the requirements
Yes.
of law, correct? But that does not mean that you lack the ability to conform your conduct to the requirements of law, does it?
That's correct.
Now, Mr. Boyle, in starting to question you, went to your conclusions, which were that there were no substance to an NGI plea. At the time of the offenses, Mr. Dahmer was fully able to appreciate right from wrong and to conform his conduct to the dictates of law. Those were your findings, correct?
That's correct.
And those are to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty,
That's
correct?
correct.
Now, I believe in Mr. Boyle's first formulation of questions, it sounded like you found no mental disease and therefore found that he was able to appreciate right from wrong and to conform his conduct to the requirements of law. Did you make two separate findings? One, that he had no mental disease. Did you make that finding?
Yes.
Separate and distinct from that finding, did you also find that he was fully able to appreciate right from wrong and conform his conduct to the requirements of law?
Yeah, I so found.
Whether or not someone, were to define Mr. Dahmer's fascination with dead bodies as a mental disease or defect, from the evidence you viewed of what he did, do you have any, would that change in your, strike that, do you have any doubt that he was able, during the period of time of the homicides, to conform his conduct to the requirements of law?
Before you answer that, doctor, I object to the form of the question because it elicits in the question the absence and or presence, either way, of a finding of mental disease. Since this doctor did not find a mental disease, it's inappropriate for the second question to be answered. Let's first find the first answer.
Your Honor.
This is a very important factor, Your Honor. The court well knows how the question is posed. Since this doctor did not find the answer to the first question, the second question cannot be answered by him.
However, he's already testified he made two separate and distinct findings. One, whether or not there was a mental disease, and two, whether or not he could conform his conduct to the requirements of law.
Once he says no to the first, he can't be asked his opinion on the second.
He's an expert witness. Those are the two issues in the case.
I haven't asked for argument, but no. First of all, Mr. Boyle, I understand the basis of your objection because I recall the testimony that he gave under your cross-examination. However, I think that should be left in the province of the jury, so I will allow the state to ask that question. The objection is overruled.
Did you, based on your review, your testing of Mr. Dahmer, your review of the information concerning Mr. Dahmer, and your conversations with Mr. Dahmer, make a determination as to whether or not he could conform his conduct to the requirements of law and not kill on each of the 15 charged homicides?
Yes, I made that determination.
And what was that determination?
That he was so able to conform his conduct.
And also that he knew right from wrong?
Yes.
And that finding was to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty?
That's correct.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay. Doc Boyle. I'm in trouble. You made a finding, first off, that he was not mentally diseased, right?
I think we're dealing with semantics. You know, I said he had a disorder that happens to be listed in DSM-3.
You made a decision that he is suffering from a personality disorder not otherwise specified.
But I had hoped to indicate that by virtue of giving legal testimony, I had to translate my terminology into legal terms. Then I think we got into difficulty.
Well, but you see, I'm left with this question because the definition, and I don't make these things up, says that a person is not responsible if they are suffering from a mental disease, and as a result of that mental disease, they lack substantial capacity to conform their conduct to requirements of law. Now, you know that definition.
Yes.
You, in the process of doing what you were asked to do, whether you like it or not, have to help us answer those questions. And that's what you've testified to. And you said, my finding was that he was suffering from a personality disorder not otherwise specified.
Yes.
I asked you, is that a mental disease under that definition?
For purposes of testimony here, the answer is yes.
So he was suffering from a mental disease.
Yes.
As a result of that mental disease, it's your testimony, he did not lack substantial capacity to conform his conduct to requirements of law.
That's correct.
Fine. Good. Now, you're not suggesting, are you, that the United States military, you were in the military
Yes,
as a soldier.
yes.
I was in for 6 years. Do you understand that they teach people to dehumanize the enemy so it makes it easier for them to kill them?
Yes. Not necessarily using those constructs, but to make it easier to kill by characterizing them in a manner that could be considered they become more objects than usual.
What branch were you in?
Well, I was in military intelligence, but I'm also a consultant to the VA, and in the last several years, I've talked to large numbers of Vietnam War veterans.
I understand, but did you go through the infantry, artillery, armor school?
No, quartermaster.
Okay. Would Jeffrey Dahmer, in your professional opinion, committed these same 15 crimes had he not had a drink of alcohol in his entire life?
Would you repeat that?
Sure. Let me rephrase it. Consul brought up the question of alcohol.
Yes.
Would Jeffrey Dahmer have committed these same offenses if on the instance of each and every one of these homicides, he did not have anything to drink?
The offenses in general, and it's hard to pick one from the other, would have been less likely should he not have had alcohol.
My question is, in your professional psychological opinion, to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, would these crimes not have happened if Jeffrey Dahmer had not been drinking alcohol?
The best answer is that they would be less likely to have occurred, but may indeed have occurred without alcohol.
Now, my red shoes and mushroom examples didn't go over very well, but they played, I hope, a portion in asking you whether or not a person's paraphilic disorder can drive them to do things that appear to be bizarre. And the answer to that is yes, correct?
That's correct.
I must say that I am, and the last thing in the world I'm going to suggest is because you call him Jeffrey that it meant anything, but you do realize in your written report, simply because they're talking about reference to how many times Dr. Becker did it, you referred to him as Mr. Dahmer 17 times, and you called him Jeffrey every time you talked about him yesterday. That has no meaning whatsoever, correct? The fact that your written report said Mr. Dahmer and you talked to him, you said Jeffrey, it has no meaning, does it?
It's an interesting stylistic difference. I'm not sure I know what it means.
One thing that I did not ask you, and I asked leave of the court, I had a note up the top of the page, but I missed it. It was a subject matter I should have brought up in my first cross, and I would like to ask. It's just going to take a second.
Let's find out if, why don't you ask your question and find out if there's an objection?
Did you talk?
I thought of one I wanted to.
Well,
Okay.
fair.
Okay.
Did you talk to Tracy Edwards?
Did I talk to Tracy? No.
Okay. You know that Tracy Edwards, you know who he is.
Yes.
And you know you saw him. I mean, he was the last one to see Mr. Dahmer. Did you feel it would not be important, not necessary, or did you feel sufficiently knowledgeable about where you were that one way or the other you wouldn't have made any difference?
With regard to Tracy Edwards,
Talking to him about what he saw going on in that apartment.
I would have liked to have talked to him. I didn't.
Okay. Thank you.
Just very briefly, going back to the alcohol issue, did you review Mr. Dahmer's 176-page statement to the police?
Very briefly, yes.
You aware that this statement, which is already before the jury, was in there He stated that when he killed these individuals, he was always drunk, and the drinking helped him to get into the frame of mind and made it easier for him. He indicated that he didn't drink every day, but when he planned to get someone, he would start drinking after he planned, and then he was usually drunk when he killed them. He related that he even drank when he was cutting up the bodies. He again stated that it helped to make it easier when he was doing this. He related that he feels that he is not an alcoholic, and the reason he was drinking was due to the fact that he committed these terrible offenses. Were you aware of that indication from Mr. Dahmer?
Yes, I remember that.
And is that one of the reasons that you indicated that had he not voluntarily gotten himself drunk to kill, it would be somewhat less likely that these people would be dead?
Yes.
Because he would have been even more able to control his conduct.
Would have been more able, that's correct.
And my follow-up question that I didn't get to last time, Mr. Boyle.
Maybe I'll change my mind.
Mr. Boyle asked you whether or not you had an opinion as to whether or not Jeffrey Dahmer would have killed again had after this last offense, had he essentially not been caught, if he would have killed again, and you indicated yes.
Yes.
Does that in any way affect your opinion that he was able to control his conduct and not kill at the times he did it?
No, it wouldn't alter my opinion.
Nothing further.
Nothing.
Doctor, you may step down.
Thank you.
In view of the closeness to the noon hour, I think we'll break for lunch at this time. However, since we're getting out of here a little before 12, I would suggest that we return at 1:15. And today I'm really saying 1:15 for the benefit of the people who...
We were here at 1:15.
I don't... Okay?
Yes.
Court's in recess.
All right, please.
Okay, my understanding is we have a couple of legal matters to take care of before we can bring the jury back out. Is that correct?
That is true, Your Honor.
Go ahead, Mr. McCann.
It is my understanding now that the two doctors have been called, and for purposes of the record, I would move that the court grant summary judgment to the state on this record to the effect that the defendant is in fact sane, has failed to meet any burden of proof requisite to do that. I would further summon the court's attention, particularly to Dr. Friedman's testimony, although it was also raised by Dr. Palermo, that what is now being referred to as the sexual disorders was in fact simply a subsection of the personality disorders in the DSM-1. Dr. Palermo adverted to that. Then Dr. Friedman, in his statement on personal responsibility, pointed out his concern, while expressing respect for several of his colleagues that appeared, said he was gravely concerned that what had been traditionally held, persons traditionally held responsible for it, in other words, acting out of the sexual deviations, that he was distressed that what was happening now was that it was being argued that they ought not be held responsible for it. And it seems to me this is precisely what our state Supreme Court has warned against, and that is defalking in the legal responsibility to letting the medical profession, by manipulation of the DSM-3R, dictate what will be a mental disease in the state of Wisconsin for purposes of the American Law Institute defense. I think we actually have both Palermo and Friedman adverting to that. What Palermo said was expressly that, yes, it used to be under DSM-1. It was a personality. It was a subsection of the personality disorder, sex deviant. And then we had Friedman continuing saying, yes, in the past, these people have been held responsible for this, and that he was troubled that now he's seeing an argument, and he didn't do this in any derogatory remark of his colleagues, but he expressed his reservations that what people had in the past been held responsible for, now we're going to be under the aegis of a change in DSM-3R, we're going to be, attempts would be made to hold them not responsible. And that's precisely what's happening here. Under the aegis of a change in DSM and the DSM-3R, the defense is marching under the flag of a newly created mental illness. translating into a mental disease within the ALI definition. And I would urge the court, as a matter of law, now is the time to scotch such perfidious abuse of the law with this, and I would urge the court to non-suit on this particular issue and to grant summary judgment to the state on the issue of sanity.
Okay, the court's ruling would be that this motion is not appropriate at this time.
Well, Judge,
Now, wait a minute, Mr. Boyle. This is, I guess what you're really asking for is equal time to make a speech.
I'm highly offended.
The jury is not present at this time. It seems to me that whatever the situation is at the end of the defendant presenting his case, that's the situation. The court's heard the motion and denied the motion, and I think this is significant. Now, I understand Mr. McCann wanting to preserve his record, and therefore the motion is there. So the court's ruling two ways. One is that it's not an appropriate motion at this time.
Good.
The other is, even if it were an appropriate motion, the court would deny it.
I guess the problem that I have is it looks like we're the bad guys pursuing our legal remedy while he's trying to tell everybody that we're trying to play games in the courtroom, and that offends me, and I object to him making a motion when he knows the motion's inappropriate. It can't be made. You've already ruled that we're going forward. It's going to be a jury question, and unless you take it away from the jury at the close of all the testimony, he has no business making motions like that, and I object to him doing it.
Okay. Wait, look, okay, so horse of peace right now. You've each had a chance to make a speech. Let's go on. I understand there's another legal issue to deal with.
We have subpoenaed a Dr. Carol Olson. I'm advised that he's here represented by an attorney who wishes to argue a motion to the court.
Very well.
Mr. O'Mara of my office will respond.
If it will save everybody a lot of time, we're going to waive any claim of attorney-client privilege and let this good doctor testify.
I think it's physician patient.
I think.
Physician patient.
Physician patient. What'd I say?
You said attorney client.
Well, I get a little confused sometimes. Physician patient. Mr. Dahmer was told about this. I had my colleague, Ms. Ryan, Ms. Patricus, go back and explain it to him. I asked him if that's what he wanted to do, and he said he did. Mr. Dahmer, you waive on the record the ability of Dr. Olson to testify concerning matters that he knows about that are germane to this case. With your approval, and you understand that you could stop him from testifying. If you chose not to waive the privilege, you'll waive the privilege.
Yes, I waive.
Right.
That solve the problem?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, then I think at this point we're ready for the jury. Is that correct, counsel? Ready? We ready for the jury?